Back, everybody. It is the Peer-to-Peer Policy Podcast. I am Brian Morgenstern here with Sam Lyman. A lot to talk about this week. Trump's evolution on Bitcoin and crypto continues. We got to talk about some big developments in the comedy world, which is near and dear to my heart. Sam, where do we begin today?
So some big news, some might even say huge news.
Huge.
As you mentioned, Brian, last week, Trump embraced Bitcoin and crypto more broadly. So at an event that was exclusive to holders of his NFT collection, he came out and he said, if you're for crypto, you better vote for Trump. Let's watch a clip of that.
They are against it. The Biden doesn't even know what it is. If you ask Biden, sir, are you for or against crypto? What's that? What the? Get me off the stage. He's saying, get me off the stage. No, he has no idea. But look, Gensler is very much against it. The Democrats are very much against it. And I say this, a lot of people are very much for it, probably a lot of the people in this group. And I'm fine with it. I want to make sure it's good and solid and everything else, but I'm good with it. And if you like crypto in any form, and it comes in a lot of different forms, if you're in favor of crypto, you better vote for Trump.
There it is. There it is. He's embracing his role as the pro-crypto candidate.
Which is something, Brian, to your credit, you suggested that he do months ago. So in an op-ed in Fortune, if you wouldn't mind pulling that up, Dylan, Brian laid out the playbook here for the Trump campaign. Why embracing Bitcoin would be a low-risk, high-reward strategy for Trump. Looks like somebody on the Trump team actually read this op-ed because Trump himself has had a remarkable evolution surrounding cryptocurrency where he used to be against it, and now he's very much for it. He seems to have seen the light on this issue. So how did you realize from such an early point that this would be a winning issue for Trump?
Because people who are very interested in Bitcoin and the values behind it, like self-sovereignty, censorship-resistant assets, currency, stores of value, people who want innovation to thrive in the US. They don't want to have to go to other jurisdictions to get the latest and greatest tech in the financial space. There's a lot of people with a lot of different reasons why they like Bitcoin and why they're holding it. And now we're looking at tens of millions of Americans who hold it. Coinbase's estimate is over 52 million Americans hold some digital assets. More than half of those is, Bitcoin. So I think that there is a voting bloc that is not naturally political or really aligned with one party or the other, but more aligned with sort of these values. Dissatisfaction with the legacy financial system, legacy institutions, and enthusiasm about a peer-to-peer future where you can be your own bank, hold your own assets, transact directly with other parties, and not worry about the government getting involved to censor you or banks potentially failing like they did in 2008, and then some medium-sized banks more recently, just in the last year. There's real enthusiasm for this technology and its ability to foster individual empowerment and human freedom. The reason why I think it made sense for Trump to do what he did, even though he had been very anti-Bitcoin in the past, he called it a scam. He said he likes the US dollar. He evolved on this issue in part because of electoral politics, because of what I just explained. There are, upwards of 50 million Americans owning these digital assets with great enthusiasm. If one candidate comes out and says, I'm for it, well, we already have one candidate who's against it. The Biden administration, President Trump was quite right in his comments, that the Biden administration has been treated Bitcoin and the entire industry that we work in with unbridled hostility. So at this point, you had one candidate for president, the current president, basically telling people, I don't want you to be able to use these technologies. And I think your industry, which is many people, including in a lot of hotly contested states, saying, I think your industry should be out of business. So if your choice is between one candidate saying, I don't believe that your job should exist, I want to regulate you out of existence, and the other candidate is like, I'm fine with it, it's actually not that hard a choice. And so really the ball was put on the tee for President Trump to take this position because it's an important wedge issue. And Sam, you've done some great research. Maybe you can touch on that, on the number of people who own these assets in swing states and the subset of voters who would potentially vote based on this issue in an election that will be decided by tens of thousands of votes across 4 to 6 states. This is such an important issue. If you get people who are going to vote on it, that can make the difference between winning and losing an election. And so the calculus for Trump was there are some people who are so passionate about this, they might vote for me if I just say I'm fine with it because Biden is so hostile to it. And that could make the difference in this election. Whereas if he comes out against it, well, then he's got the same position as Biden. Again, this is pure political calculus. We can start there. Whereas Biden is totally hostile to it. So if he has a contrast, he can create a wedge for tens of thousands, probably, maybe more, voters in swing states and give them a reason to vote for him and a reason to vote against Biden. Whereas if he has the same position as Biden, then they're going to be equally unpopular with the Bitcoin and crypto community. So it was a risk-free, reward-heavy decision because there's hardly anybody who would come out and vote because they hate Bitcoin. They're not going to come out and say, I'm voting for Joe Biden because I hate Bitcoin. But there are a lot of people who would come out and vote for Trump because he said he's fine with Bitcoin. So it makes sense, risk-free, pretty good reward, potential for enough votes to swing the election. That, in a nutshell, is why this made sense. Because these voters with these values needed a candidate, and Biden had already pretty much staked out his territory that he was going to be against their interest. And Trump, all he had to do, like I said, the ball was on the tee. All he had to do was take a nice little swing at it, and it looks like that's what he's doing. I think it makes perfect sense from an electoral standpoint. The one point I would quibble with is that it still is kind of a bipartisan issue. There was just a vote last week in Congress. 21 Democrats voted for a resolution to disapprove a regulation that the SEC had put out in favor of the Bitcoin and crypto industry to allow banks and financial institutions to actually custody digital assets. Highly unpopular, illegal move. It was pretty much a common sense vote. And the fact that 21 Democrats in the House of Representatives voted against the Biden administration should tell you that this really isn't that partisan of an issue. But the Biden administration has made it a layup for Trump to just say, I'm fine with it. And then all of a sudden you probably get tens of thousands of votes in your corner. Very important development for the industry. Puts a lot of pressure on the Biden administration, by the way, to change course. If they're not seeing this calculus, I think they need to fire their political advisors and get some new ones, because this is really a common sense decision by Trump.
Yeah, like you said, this is simple political calculus at the end of the day. So just a few statistics. 1 in 5 voters in key swing states say that crypto for them will be a pivotal issue at the ballot box. That translates to about 5 million votes. Again, in states that were decided in some cases by just tens of thousands of votes. Those are 5 million votes that are there for the candidates taking. And all the candidate has to do is come out, even with a tepid endorsement, saying, I'm okay with crypto, which is more or less what Trump did. And by so doing, he can grab those voters. He can even poach some voters who probably voted for Biden in the last go round. And he could potentially win those swing states just by embracing crypto alone, which raises an interesting question. Some would go so far as to say that crypto could swing the 2024 election. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's very popular, or very possible. So one point I would make is that there was some recent data we saw that said holders of Bitcoin and other digital assets favored President Biden in the 2020 election by, I believe it was 9 points. And now those same voters are favoring Trump by, I think it was 13 points. It was like a 20-point swing, 20-plus point swing among the holders of these assets, which suggests probably a small sample size or what have you, but it is indicative of this notion that there is a subset of voters who are going to vote on this issue. Their issue is not immigration. It's not abortion. It is not inflation. Well, inflation is related to digital assets. We talk about it all the time. So that's probably part of it. But the fact that there is a pretty substantial subset of voters who are going to vote on this issue. And it's clear, it's a clear divide. One candidate is against, one candidate is basically for it. If that's your issue, then it's a layup. This is an easy decision to make. And I believe the last election, it was 4 swing states and 80,000 voters, thereabouts. You can check my math on that, but I think that was the difference in the 2020 election. So if that's the playing field here, and you have 5 million voters across the swing states, you only need, well, let's say, 100,000 out of the 5 million. You're talking about, what is that? 2%?
Yeah,
2% of the electorate. So you only need 2% to make up their mind on this issue and have a clear contrast, a clear wedge, and cut for Trump instead of Biden, which, again, based on the data we're seeing, is a real thing. That is a real voter that exists and is a substantial number. It is not unrealistic. And if you had asked me this a year ago or 2 years ago or 4 years ago, whether Bitcoin and crypto could decide a presidential election, I would have kind of chuckled and said, yeah, okay. Yeah, right behind the economy, immigration, abortion, climate change, energy independence, all the sort of top billing issues. I would have said, like, there's no way it's going to rise to that level. It might in this election. It actually might. And we're seeing the data set develop there that it could happen. So very exciting developments. I think it is indicative, hopefully, of a larger push towards human freedom and individual autonomy and self-sovereignty and these kind of values that are of the rugged American that really are American values. I'm glad to see that kind of bubbling up and the pressure hitting our politicians and our candidates, and that sort of value set is going to be represented in this election. I think that's a great thing for the country.
Agreed. I think flubbing crypto was a huge misstep on the part of the Biden campaign. I think their struggle right now is that they're running as if it's 2020 still. So let's rewind the clock to May 2020. This was just after COVID. It was just after Bitcoin had crashed around $3,000 and it had started to recover. Little did people know at that time that it would go on to one of its most epic bull runs of all time. And I think we also forget that when Biden was elected, Bitcoin had yet to reach its all-time high of around $68,000, which happened just a few months later. And so I think Biden and his team are in the mindset that it's still 2020. They're in this mindset that crypto is still a niche issue, that it's not something that 52 million Americans own, that it's not something that many millennials and Gen Z Americans and minorities look to as a way to build wealth outside of the traditional financial system. They're completely ignoring these voters. Many of them will probably turn to Trump in this go-round because of their negligence. It's a real self-own on the part of the Biden campaign. Possibly there's a chance that they can pivot still, but it seems like Trump is really owning this issue on the campaign trail.
Well, so that's another important point that you raised. I'm not generally a fan of dividing people into boxes based on age and race and sex and all this other stuff. But there is very clear demographic data to suggest that voters, particularly young minority men, Black and Hispanic men, are leaving the Democratic Party and trending more towards Trump. If you look at the demographics of people who are owning Bitcoin and experimenting and playing around with digital assets, it is disproportionately younger minority men, more Democrats than Republicans. And so it's more of a generational issue than it is a classic partisan one. It's just, it is what it is. And so that comports with the trend that we're seeing of dissatisfaction. Now, there's other reasons for that migration of voters. For starters, a lot of gentlemen in, a lot of labor businesses, construction, home renovation, painting, landscaping, a lot of things where you often see sort of a higher percentage of that industry being made up by younger minority men, they had more work statistically. They were making more money when Trump was president. So if you want to be really cynical about it, it could just be dollars and cents. But I actually think you can draw a bigger inference towards those values of self-sovereignty, not trusting banks, not trusting legacy institutions, which really is white people, black people, Hispanic people. A lot of people are feeling that way since 2008, since the Occupy Wall Street movement started. You had a sort of a populist uprising of people dissatisfied with legacy institutions. That has led, and 2009, of course, was the Bitcoin white paper, the creation of Bitcoin, allowing people to be their own bank because they didn't trust banks. 15 years in the future, we've had more bank failures. We have government spending out of control. We have more inflation. So more and more reasons for people to migrate towards Bitcoin and digital assets. It's tone deaf for this administration to take the positions that it has. They're going against their own voters. They're going against normal Americans with common sense and aspirations and, desires to be able to help themselves. So it really is nonsensical. They put the ball on the tee for Trump, and Trump is now capturing a pretty substantial portion of the electorate because of it. Again, I think it's great for politicians to feel this pressure. I think it's necessary. I think it's good for the country, and hopefully it will lead to better policy outcomes in the future.
Right. And it's interesting because, like you said, it's tone deaf. And I think the Biden campaign has no idea just how passionate and frankly crazy the crypto community can be. I mean, we interact with laser eye Bitcoin maxis day in and day out, and y'all are nuts, but we respect you and your diamond handing because, I mean, that's what made a lot of these people wealthy. And it's a community. It's very cultish at the end of the day, but there's some definite social upsides to that. And I think what they underestimate is the exact same people who've been holding their Bitcoin for a decade. These people aren't just going to exit to the left when someone comes after them politically. When you are able to politically organize the crypto community, that is truly a weapon that can be wielded by a tactful politician in a really effective way. So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And there's been a lot of debate in the community as well over this idea of a single issue crypto voter. So there's a lot of people who are pro-crypto who are coming out and saying, this is the make or break issue for me at the ballot box this November. I am going to vote on crypto and crypto alone. And there's been some real pushback to that within the industry, including an op-ed that was written by the editors at Blockworks. Dylan, would you mind bringing that up? So this is the provocative headline that weighs in on this issue. Only a fool would vote on crypto alone. So this op-ed concludes with the idea that it's a bad idea to vote for crypto alone, because the inference here is if you vote for Trump, you're voting for somebody who will strip a woman's right to choice when it comes to an abortion, who will put our republic at risk. It really kind of goes into some Trump derangement syndrome territory. And it was not really well received in the crypto community. So I'm curious what you think, Brian. This idea of a single issue crypto voter, bad idea, good idea? Do you think there's some logic to it? It'd be great to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it told us more about the editors than it did about anything else. It shows us that they are so wedded to partisanship that they would vote to end their own jobs. I mean, this is, like I said, your choice right now is between an administration that is actively trying to put our entire industry out of business. They're not hiding it. They're laying it out there on the table. They don't want our industry to exist. The other candidate is shrugging and saying, I'm fine with it. That should not be a very difficult decision, but the TDS is strong, right? Like, people convinced themselves that the host of The Apprentice was a Russian spy for 3 years and that he's actually Hitler, even though he was in their living rooms and famous for 50 years. And people have loved this guy and laughed at him and everything else for 50 years. Now, all of a sudden, he turned into a Russia-loving Hitler. I mean, it's crazy the way people have really been kind of drinking the Kool-Aid on hating Trump. I think a single issue crypto voter makes a lot of sense when it's like, I want to vote for my best interest. What else are voters supposed to vote for? Of course, you're supposed to vote for your best interest. I mean, patriotism and values and all these things are hugely important. But along those lines, do you want the freedom? Do you want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Okay, then you should probably vote for candidates who want your job to exist tomorrow. Like, I just think it was not well received for a pretty good reason. That's my view on that. I'm sure there are single issue voters, just like there's single issue voters in the energy industry, or who want more oil and gas exploration, or they want energy independence. They want to be able to export natural gas to Western Europe, which, by the way, would be good for the American economy and good for Western Europe and bad for Russia. So, but it seems to be the same people who are paranoid and crazy about Russia don't want us to sell LNG to Western Europe. Well, if you want to weaken them, then you got to loosen the grip on this hand. So, it was emotion over fact. That's my opinion of that.
Good way of putting it. And I'm of the opinion as well that it makes all the sense in the world to be a single issue crypto voter. Why is that? Because crypto is the first domino to fall. If we lose the right to self-custody our own Bitcoin, what's to stop the government from stripping us of other rights? There's something sacred and fundamental about having the right to your own property, that if that's removed from us, or if that's in some way regulated out of existence, then that says a lot about our civil liberties here in the United States. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to vote on crypto and crypto alone, because if you're voting for crypto, you're voting not only for the right to hold digital assets, you're voting for individual liberty, you're voting for freedom, you're voting for the idea of self-sovereignty. These are the ideas that are fundamental to the founding of America. And if we lose them, we lose something really essential to what it means to be an American, and really essential to our relationship with our own government as well. So I think it makes sense. And I agree. Emotion over fact in that op-ed. I think it was not well received in the community for a reason, right?
Yeah. I'll just pick up on that for just another second, because you're making a really, really good point. It's not just about Bitcoin. Most Americans, even if you accept that it's 50 million some odd, who own it, that leaves 250 million who don't. So you have to figure a lot of people are not yet super steeped in knowledge about Bitcoin. But what does Bitcoin represent? Represents the ability, like we've said, to be your own bank, to custody your own assets, to not have to rely on the government to be a responsible steward of the US dollar and the value of the dollar. We've seen it tanking. People are looking for an alternative asset to store their value in a way that's not going to be like a melting ice cube. They don't trust banks to survive day to day. FDIC insurance is only $250,000. If you have any more than that in a bank, you're at risk of losing some assets. People are really attracted to this idea of being able to self-custody, not have to rely on any other institution that they're not quite sure they can trust anymore. It really is about the rugged individual and being able to take care of yourself, to be self-reliant, to be self-sufficient. It's a very American value. So if you believe in that, if you think that's important, whether you want to do that or not, if you think it's important that people have the option to do that, to be self-reliant, to be independent, then you should really consider learning more about Bitcoin, learn more about crypto, and potentially voting based on that, because it represents some very serious issues that are just a little bit, if you scratch the surface and get just a little bit deeper, you get there and you start to realize why the government's trying to attack it so much, because they want more people to be dependent on legacy institutions. They don't want that power to erode. But if you believe in the individual and self-sovereignty and freedom and individual empowerment, then you're probably learning about Bitcoin, and you're probably troubled by the government's position on it. So yeah, I think we've beaten this dead horse, but it's an important horse to beat, because Basically, what we're saying is that Bitcoin actually could swing this election, and it's because it's about freedom versus anti-freedom. The freedom versus the government trying to ban your assets. That's pretty scary stuff. We've seen a lot of censorship in recent years. We've seen seizure of a lot of assets. We're seeing government policies evolve like in real time. Department of Justice is now trying to argue, which is the opposite of what the Treasury Department, who regulates money transmitters, has said for a decade. Treasury has said for a decade, self-custody is not, if you're software that allows you to self-custody your Bitcoin is not a money transmitter. The Department of Justice is now arguing in court that actually software that allows you to self-custody your Bitcoin is a money transmitter. That, as we've said in past episodes here, that's like saying the maker of your leather wallet is a bank. It's not a bank. It makes no sense, but the government doesn't want you to be able to self-custody. That's the scary part. That's what people really need to realize. Sorry, we're, again, beating a dead horse, but it's an important horse. So I'll stop there.
A very important horse, and a horse that risks becoming politicized. I think a lot of people, after Trump's embrace of crypto, came out and said, oh, this is bad for the industry because it makes it more partisan. And, you know, there's some credence to that. He explicitly called out Democrats and Gary Gensler in his speech where he says, Democrats and Gary Gensler, they don't want it. So he's calling them out by name at this point. And that is, you know, it's somewhat partisan to do that. But potentially these fears are overblown. So, Brian, what do you think? Do you think that crypto is becoming a more partisan issue? If it is, what can we do to prevent that? Or is it even worth preventing it from becoming partisan?
I don't want it to be a partisan issue. I mean, I would invite Gary Gensler to adhere to his prior positions before he became SEC chair, when he thought this industry was really promising and interesting, and he was teaching a course on it in college. I would invite the president and his staff to reverse course and start embracing this and listen to the 21 House Democrats who just voted in favor of the industry, because they see something that's coming. They see a tidal wave of popular support. Look, you don't want to be Shooter McGavin against Happy Gilmore, because everybody loves Happy and everybody loves to hate Shooter. You don't want to be, I'm trying to think of a better metaphor or a better comparison. I mean, you just don't want to be for some or against something that your voters are for. And like I said, it's more Democrats than Republicans holding these assets. It's a younger, more diverse audience that are interested in this. They're just wrong on the politics. And then when you get the politics right, you start to realize why the politics are what they are. It's actually good policy as well. So I wish it weren't becoming more partisan, but for me, it's not about partisanship. It's about one candidate in this particular election thinks that my job should be able to exist tomorrow, and that our industry should be able to exist tomorrow, and that this technology is promising and gives benefits to people. The other one is saying, you know, screw you, we want to put you out of business. It's not that hard a choice, but they don't have to do that. They could change course, and that would be great if this were not at all partisan. It's, again, I can test the fact that it's purely partisan is not more generational than partisan. But the fact that you have one candidate for it and the other one against it makes it feel partisan, more partisan than it needs to be. That's for sure.
Right. On the presidential level, there's no denying that this is a partisan issue. Like you said, there's one president who wants to put the industry and everyone involved with it out of business, wants to strip the right to self-custody, wants to tax Bitcoin miners into oblivion. And then there's another president who says, I won't do any of that. In fact, I'll do the opposite. I will let you be, I will let you thrive, I will let you grow as an industry. And so for people who are pro-Bitcoin, that's a pretty clear and obvious choice. It is worth noting, though, that when we look outside of the presidential race and we look to Congress and we zoom out a little bit more, there's an argument to be made that crypto is not partisan, it's generational. And you mentioned the SAB 121 vote last week, which speaks to this idea of a generational divide on crypto issues. Dylan, would you mind bringing up that tweet? So last week, Congress voted to nullify SAB 121, which in short is a very abusive SEC policy that would preclude banks from custodying crypto assets. It would make it extremely difficult for them to do so. And so there were 21 Democrats, which I think is an interesting meme because there's only 21 million Bitcoin. There are 21 Democrats who came out and voted against this, against the SAB 121 rule, and voted in favor of the bill to repeal it. And so the average age of those Democrats was 48. I just found the list of Dems who voted in favor of this bill, looked up their ages on Wikipedia. This took me about half an hour and just did a quick calculation. 48, that's a pretty young age for a member of Congress. Congress is looking more and more like a senior citizen. And so when you have people who are young Gen Xers coming out and voting in favor of crypto, and they're all Democrat, that speaks to a fundamental divide within the Democratic Party over crypto issues. It shows that there's a faction of Democrats, the older crowd, the Maxine Waters, who's 85 years old, the Joe Bidens, who is 81, and the Elizabeth Warren crowd, who Elizabeth Warren, by the way, is 74. You have this gerontocracy that is actively fighting against the new wave, the new money, the new technology, probably because they don't understand it. But then you have other Democrats who are much younger, who are much more tied to the tech community, who see the promise and potential of this technology, and they're coming out in favor of it. They're starting to break ranks. I talked to a crypto policy friend of mine who works more on the Democratic side this last week, and he mentioned to me that there's a lot of Democrats who are done with the Warren wing of the party that's just trying to bash crypto at every possible opportunity. And I think more and more you're going to see that dam start to break. You're going to see more Dems starting to speak out, but they'll probably be younger, and that will be telling. And I think it also is evidence of another divide within the Democratic Party, where you have this aging wing that that is really old, and some of them are close to death's doorstep here. But it gives me some hope that we can keep this more of a bipartisan issue when you see that younger generation that's just coming up. So, Brian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, that list is really encouraging. We've met with some of those offices, found them to be knowledgeable, open-minded, supportive. Like I said, that's what it takes to be a good politician. Be a little bit less of a rabid partisan and pro helping your voters. Like, that shouldn't be this revolutionary concept. But so there is reason for hope. I'm encouraged by it. One of the members that I've been very impressed with recently is Richie Torres from the Bronx. He's been great on Bitcoin and digital asset issues. He's been really outspoken and passionate on Israel. It's another issue where he's been bucking a lot of his party base. A lot of the members on that list are ready to kind of break ranks, like you said, with some of this like doctrinaire crazy partisanship, and they just want to help their voters. And I commend them. We see now in this electoral process in the primary season, we've seen the Stand with Crypto Super PAC and others start to get involved in primaries and support the more open-minded pro-innovation candidates get through their primary process and emerge, ready to go to the general. I think that's been a positive impact. And again, just showing that there's hope. Over time, I think it's going to be a bumpy road, but it's going to get smoother every day, because the more we talk to policymakers, the more we educate them, the more they realize they can get votes, they can get campaign donations, they can help their voters. The better the outcome is going to be over time. So remains a frustrating environment, but is getting better. And that's very encouraging. And I commend those members for their votes. Really, really great opportunity to kind of break ranks and show your independence and show your openness to progress. So very helpful.
Yeah, kudos to those legislators, because they really had to put their necks out there to go against Maxine Waters, the president, and Elizabeth Warren herself. That takes a lot of courage. And so we tip our hat to you. So there's emerging evidence that there's other people on the left wing who are really frustrated with the Biden administration's posture towards crypto. One of those people is Mark Cuban, who, Brian, I know you had a pretty good screed against Mark Cuban a couple weeks ago. We rarely agree with this guy. A nice gentleman, made billions of dollars, good TV host of Shark Tank, right? And a funny personality on Twitter.
Yep.
But he came out this last week with guns ablaze, going after Gary Gensler and the Biden administration. So in this multi-paragraph tweet here, he comes out and he says that essentially the Biden administration doesn't understand just how much of a political liability Gary Gensler is. And he talks about how Gary Gensler has done nothing to protect the average citizen against fraud and abuse. And in fact, he's only poisoned the well for crypto companies in the United States. He's made it all but impossible for them to do business here. And so when you have Mark Cuban outwardly disagreeing with the president's posture towards crypto and decrying an SEC chairman. I mean, how often is an SEC chairman a national celebrity? Someone who's actually a big factor in a political campaign. That almost never happens. I'm pretty sure that's unprecedented in the history of politics. So it says something very interesting about how people feel about Gensler and Elizabeth Warren and the anti-crypto army that they've raised together, which raises an interesting question. Is the political risk of Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren and their ilk priced in?
I'm not sure that it is. Well, look, I don't think there would have been upwards of $100 million raised to effectively run against them, their wing of the Democratic Party, by many Democrats, right? So this is, Mark Cuban has been very clear. He does not endorse Trump for another term. He supports Biden. So for him to now come out and say, this policy area is a huge vulnerability for you, it should come with some credibility. He's also probably licking his wounds because lately he's been very pro DEI and pro a lot of left-wing causes, and that's caused him to get dunked on Twitter quite a bit. So maybe he's trying to find a differentiator, find a common ground with people to sort of rehabilitate himself a little bit, and this is a logical place to go. But even if I'm not being cynical, the White House should take this seriously. This is one of their biggest, most famous supporters coming out and saying, you are screwing the pooch on this issue. And frankly, he's right. The SEC has lost its focus. It's supposed to be on facilitating orderly markets, protecting investors, and they have gone on these political crusades. My hot take on this is that early on in his tenure, Gensler needed, Warren's support to have smooth sailing to confirmation in the Senate. So he probably made certain promises. I don't know. I'm judging based on the circumstantial evidence, based on the behavior after the fact. He seems to have reversed his view of being pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto to being just rabidly against the entire industry. The worst kept secret around town is that this was because of future ambitions, that he wanted support from the left wing for another job. Some people say he thinks he could have been Treasury Secretary or some other very powerful position in Washington, so he was playing the political game. I will say, if that is true, whether it's true or not, he miscalculated because he now has some of the most influential and beloved people in America hating him and just pointing out how incompetent and aggressively political his SEC has been. He's made himself unconfirmable for any future job at this point. So I would say that anybody thinking of employing that kind of a strategy to get your specific benefactor or two in the Senate and thinking that alone is all you need to survive in Washington. Not true. You gotta watch your flank and you gotta see what else is coming at you but this should be common sense. If you attack an industry with tens of thousands or even more people, including some of the most beloved, famous, powerful, wealthy people, whether they support your party or not, many of them do in fact support the Democratic Party. If you make life harder for them, they're not going to sit back and take it. That's what democracy is about. They're going to come out and use their funds to fund campaigns. They're going to buy ads. They're going to make their voice heard. They're going to plant stories in the press. They're going to come after you because that's the way it's supposed to work. We're supposed to have conflict in our process. That's how you're supposed to grind out only the most agreeable policy positions. That's by design in our constitutional system. So the fact that he just didn't see it, that he would just like try to put a bunch of people out of business and they were going to sit back and take it, it's crazy. So in short, after we completely skewered Mark Cuban a couple weeks ago for having a ridiculous opinion, this week I'll give him credit and say, you are correct. Thank you for speaking up, even though it's against sort of your candidate and your chosen administration. You're right. And so I'll give you credit for that.
Yeah. I hope that this humbles Gary Gensler to a degree to see someone from his own side coming out and so openly criticizing him. Gary Gensler, I have conflicted feelings about because I hate his policies, but at some level you have to respect how shrewd of a politician he is. I mean, this man is a media maven. Just for a little bit of context, he had the media savvy to make the Kardashians a focus of an SEC legal action, which for anyone who is familiar with op-ed writing or communications in general, if you can ever attach Kardashian to any headline, it's going to go viral. So he knew exactly what he was doing a couple of years ago when he brought legal action related to a crypto issue against Kim Kardashian. This man might look like just your typical boring finance guy, but that hides a very savvy media mind. And the issue is, I think he just flew a little bit too close to the sun. I mean, you're an SEC chairman, for heaven's sake. You're not a gosh dang rock star or celebrity, okay? And I think he has in his mind, oh, I will raise my national profile by making a whipping boy of crypto. That's backfired massively against him. And like you said, I think he's going to have a really hard time getting confirmed for any position in the future. He was always angling for Secretary of Treasury. It's more or less an open secret here in DC, but that's going to be a lot harder after this past couple of years of his tenure at the SEC. Even if Biden is reelected, I'm very pessimistic about Gary Gensler's prospects. I do think they'll continue to recognize this man is more of a liability than he is an asset at this point.
Yeah, 100%. He's made himself unconfirmable, and you're not even going to have some of the most influential voices. You're going to have some of the most influential voices on the left coming out and saying we cannot vote for this guy. So yeah, no, it totally backfired. He picked the wrong horse, as it were, with Senator Warren as his kind of Senate benefactor. She is excellent at, speaking of media savvy, she's excellent at getting attention. She's very bad at legislating. She doesn't pass any laws. But she's been very savvy at staffing this administration and having outsized influence. So I'll give her credit there as well as Gary being savvy enough to get where he is. But I think he's totally messed up his chances of getting anywhere else in Washington.
Days are numbered. So switching gears here, Brian, let's go to our final segment, my favorite segment of all, draft tweets. I think you have a lot to say about Jerry Seinfeld this week.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is comedy. I've been a comedy fan forever. I used to do it sort of as a hobby for fun. In New York, I hosted my own shows. So big comedy developments this week that give me a lot of hope. But I also wanted to contrast it with the coverage by the mainstream media and point out that unfortunately they're still out of touch and they're not learning their lesson. But let me start with Seinfeld and his speech. Dylan, can we just play the first part of that clip?
Privilege is a word that has taken quite a beating lately. Privilege today seems to be the worst thing you can have. I would like to take a moment to defend it. Again, a lot of you are thinking, I can't believe they invited this guy. Too late. I say, use your privilege. I grew up a Jewish boy from New York. That is a privilege if you want to be a comedian. Thanks.
We can stop there. That's perfect. Thanks. Creator of, in my opinion, the greatest show ever created. His speech was anti-woke. It was very well received. He talked about using your privilege, be proud of the fact that was at Duke University. He said, I used to know a bunch of Harvard guys, and he kind of made fun of Harvard. and said that people would kind of be bashful when they mentioned where they went to school. He said, don't be afraid. Like, don't use your privilege. Be proud. Tell people I got an outstanding education at Duke. He went on to talk about how people, you got to keep your sense of humor. Like, I know you're so concerned about hurting everybody's feelings every second of the day, but you're going to need your sense of humor just to get through life. Because, in essence, he was saying like microaggressions are the least of your worries. Life is hard. You need a sense of humor. It was a great talk. And I think it was very well received by the audience, and it was well received on social media. Now let's just go to the headlines from the mainstream media and how they covered it. Okay, we got receives honorary degree, students walk out in protest. Let's go to the next one. Students walk out of Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech. What's the next one? Support for Israel leads to walkout amid his Duke University speech. And New York Times, Jerry Seinfeld's Duke University commencement speech spurs walkouts. I looked at the numbers and why the students were walking out. There were about 7,000 graduates, I believe, 6,900, something along those lines, or people there. It was estimated to be about 30 people walked out, chanting Free Palestine. Why? Because he is a Jewish person who went to Israel and met with victims of the October 7th attacks. Obviously, the people protesting were less than 1%, less than 0.5% of the audience who had an untenable position, saying that one of the most famous Jewish people in the world can't go meet with Jewish people who are victims of a terror attack. It's an insane position. And it was just by a couple dozen people out of 7,000. And yet, who does the mainstream media put right in the headline? Of course, the crybabies. So I wanted to point out that Seinfeld's speech was great and sent an excellent message. The protesters are nobodies who have no influence whatsoever, but for what the stinking mainstream media gives them. But I will say Jerry's speech was great and was an excellent message for graduates today. Be proud of who you are, maintain a sense of humor, really excellent messages. A couple other developments this week that I think were also very promising for the world of comedy. There was the roast of Tom Brady on Netflix. It was irreverent. It was gross and raunchy and hilarious, and people loved it. It shows that the people have a sense of humor. The mainstream media is out of touch. And then finally, Kevin Hart received the Mark Twain Prize. I think we have a graphic for that. Yes, at the Kennedy Center, which is right here in Washington, D.C., a venerable institution. And of course, the Mark Twain Prize is, I would say, arguably the greatest prize that a comedian could win, because it's like a lifetime achievement award. And his speech was, and Jerry, by the way, Seinfeld was the first roaster comedian who performed at that event, and it was fantastic. Dave Chappelle was there. Chris Rock was there. I mean, it's an incredible event. But Kevin Hart's speech, just touching on Seinfeld's message to the kids of like, have a sense of humor and don't be, use your privilege. Like, Kevin Hart's speech was, I think, even more impactful because the whole event was about his massive success, about how this guy does stand up in front of stadiums full of people. He's been in 60 movies. He is one of the most famous people on the planet. And his speech was about how none of it would really matter if he didn't share it with his family and friends. And his speech was like not even, I mean, it was funny, but it wasn't like a stand-up bit. It was basically a tribute to the people who are there for him in life and the real relationships. And he pointed that out time after time in his remarks, that it's really about your relationships in your life. That's what gives it meaning. And so between these two speeches and then put the Tom Brady roast as a cherry on top, it gives me hope that like comedy is back and normal people are ready to laugh. They're tired of woke nonsense. And the mainstream media is the last one to get that memo. So that's why I just want to end on an optimistic note that it's okay to laugh again, guys. America's back. we're coming back.
We're back, baby. We're so back. Yeah, it's makes me optimistic as well. I mean, I just look at the Jerry Seinfeld speech, and a speech like that could not have been given just 4 years ago, which I think shows just how much things have shifted in our country, in our culture, in a way where we're becoming normal again. That's my hope, at least. 2020 was an absolutely insane time where you couldn't make jokes. I remember just with friends of mine who, maybe we had different politics. During the summer of 2020, I just couldn't make jokes around them. And I had to watch myself. But we're finally reaching a time where we can start to laugh with each other again, which I think laughing is really, it's an adhesive. It's a way that heals people and relationships. We need to be able to laugh together. We need to be able to laugh at each other to an extent. We need to be able to laugh at ourselves. I think that's where the woke movement really lost it, was when they killed humor. They killed comedy, like you said. If you can't make a joke, it means you can't critique yourself. It means you lack all self-awareness of your movement and how you're perceived by other people. I think that's really where they lost the country. So the fact that, like you said, 70 students out of 1,000 walked out of a commencement speech just shows how small that minority is and how people we're done. We're just done as a country. We're not listening to that very loud vocal minority anymore that just wants to make life terrible and miserable for everyone. People, like you said, they want to be proud of who they are, where they come from, what their country is. They don't want to live a prudish, puritanic lifestyle that the woke movement pushes on people. So I too take heart that the woke movement has peaked, seemed to have peaked in the summer of 2020. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a dead cat bounce at some time, but I think it is well and truly over, at least for the time being.
Yeah, well, 30 out of 7,000 should tell you that how small a minority it is. On that point, like I've said in the past, like a performance artist goes in front of the audience and says, "Hello, Cleveland," and everybody screams and yells and cheers. They don't boo. They're proud of being from Cleveland or wherever they're from. And I'm not going to take the opportunity to crap all over Cleveland right now, even though I really, really want to. People want to be proud of where they're from. They want to be proud of their country. They want to be proud of their city. They want to be proud of their family and friends. So that's really where the woke movement lost everybody, was trying to convince us all that we should be ashamed. And that ties back into Jerry's comment about use your privilege. Be proud of where you're from. Be proud of your excellent education. He's proud to be a Jewish boy from New York doing comedy. Like, you should be proud. Nobody's saying that the country's perfect or that everything is perfect. Of course, we'll keep improving. We've improved vastly over the centuries. But in order to have a happy life, you have to be proud of where you're from and who you are. So that's the message, everybody. Feel free to laugh. Be proud and be out and proud with who you are. And I think that's the gist of what we wanted to say today. So thanks for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button. Like it. I always say this too late. We always forget to say this earlier in the broadcast. But like, subscribe, share, follow us on Twitter at MorganSternNJ, at Sam Lyman33. X, whatever it's called now. And we'll see you next time. And feel free to laugh and be who you are. Thanks, everybody.